decades.
Okay, let's try to unpack this.
The U.S. government
Picture,
was
if you will,
basically
a kind of hidden network. It's really
supernatural
decentralized,
stuff,
operating
psychic
right,
powers,
across
telepathy,
encrypted
seeing
chat,
things far away
gaming
with your
servers,
mind.
social media
Pure
places.
fantasy. That's what they
And it's
told
not
everyone.
Yeah,
just
that was the public
about
face.
sharing horrible
Complete
content.
skepticism.
It's an
But,
active,
while that was the official
quite severe
story,
digital
behind
threat.
closed doors,
And it
something
preys on really
something much
vulnerable
stranger
minors
was
using
apparently
things like
going on.
isolation, trauma,
deep
fear,
inside the
using them as
intelligence community.
tools, basically.
It's a really
for
interesting
recruitment
contrast,
and
isn't it?
coercion.
Publicly,
Yeah,
it's
and
all
what maybe
scientific
started as sort of a
dismissal.
local
Privately,
horrifying
the
story,
Pentagon,
it's
the
now
CIA,
genuinely a top
they're clearly wrestling with something very different.
You've got
These
law enforcement
fantasies suddenly
agencies all over the
become,
world,
a
FBI, Canada's
serious
RCMP.
strategic issue.
Exactly.
They've all
and
elevated
that
this
worry,
group.
that sort of
They call
creeping
it Group
fear about
764
psychic
from maybe
warfare,
an underground
it leads to
rumor
one of the,
to a
honestly,
full-on
most
counter-threat
bizarre and top
investigation.
secret
Right, Group
projects of the whole
764.
Cold War.
It seems to sit at this really
Project
awful intersection.
I mean, just
We're
picture
talking like
an actual
sophisticated
government
child
project trying to
exploitation,
weaponize
these
the
video
human mind.
extortion
Funded off
schemes,
books.
intensely
And
sadistic
officially, the
demands.
cover
And
story,
then there's
or
this
maybe the initial
undercurrent of
idea was
ideological
remote
extremism,
viewing.
which seems to make
Right.
it dangerously
This
unique in the sort of
supposed
digital underworld.
ability
Absolutely.
for trained
Our
people
goal
to just
today really is to give you a
perceive
fast
distant
but
places,
thorough
secret enemy
contextual
bases, maybe
understanding
even
of this
peek into
threat.
the future.
We need
All
to
just using their minds.
and we
Trace
should be
its
clear,
origins,
this
which are
wasn't
kind
some
of unlikely.
like
Side hobby.
map
It
out
wasn't
its
just a few
specific
folks messing
brutal
around.
tactics,
Okay.
its
This
modus
was a strategic
operandi,
move, a
and
direct
analyze why
response
the
to
legal
what they
system
thought
has been
the
forced to
Soviets were doing.
classify it and
They were
respond to
urgently
it as
trying to
something
get
much
an
more
edge
severe
in
than
a
just say
completely new kind of,
sophisticated
well,
cybercrime
battlefield.
We're
And that's
trying to
what we're
find the
doing today. We're
patterns
gonna
and all
peel
this
back
chaos.
those layers of
Okay,
secrecy.
so the beginning.
Really
It's surprisingly
deep dive into Project Sunstreak
banal, almost,
and
for
the
something
kind of
so
wild
terrifying now.
conspiracy theories
Sources
that are still
confirm it
swirling around.
basically
Yeah,
emerged
because
in
the story goes
2021.
way
Yeah,
beyond just
recent.
Founded by
psychic
teenagers.
spying.
Oh, absolutely.
Bradley Chance
It might have
Cahan
cracked
in
open the
Stephenville,
door
Texas.
to, well,
Use the
alien
name
contact,
Felix a lot.
maybe even
And the name
some
itself,
sources suggest
764. It's
interdimensional
Weirdly
conflict.
unromantic.
It gets pretty
isn't
out
it?
there.
It literally
It
came
really
from the
does.
first
So
three
we're going to
digits
look at
of
where
the
it came
CIP
from, the
code.
really
Wow.
unsettling
So,
things
yeah,
that
not
viewers
conjured
reported
in some,
seeing, the
dark basement ritual.
weird overlaps
It started
with old
local,
occult stuff,
online,
and these
digitally
incredible
native from the
claims about
get-go.
contacting,
And that local origin
well,
maybe
the
gives us a
unknown.
clue about its
So yeah,
structure later
settle
on.
in. This
So
is
when
where
you
things
look at
get
how the
weird.
group presents
So where did
itself,
Sunstreak
the
even
identity,
come
the
from?
messaging is
It
just
really kicks
intensely
off
violent.
back
You
in the
hear
early
words like
70s. There was this
nihilistic,
quiet
sadistic
panic brewing,
aligned
in
with
the
accelerationism
intelligence world during the Cold
they
War.
explicitly
Word got
borrow
out that the
symbols
Soviets
from
were pouring
neo-Nazism
serious
satanic
money and
groups.
effort into
Right.
parapsychology.
But what's really interesting
And
here
not
is
just
where
dabbling.
analysts
We're talking
tend to draw the line.
state-sponsored
Is it
experiments,
deep,
telepathy,
genuine
moving
ideological
objects with the
belief,
mind,
or is it
psychokinesis,
more
and
like
crucially, remote
performative
viewing.
aesthetic
Yeah, and when
branding?
U.S. intelligence picked
The
up on
consensus
this,
seems to be it's
alarms
less
went off.
about a coherent
Big time.
philosophy.
The
Like they're
Pentagon
not all
especially.
sitting around
You can
reading,
imagine the fear,
dense
right?
political
What if
track.
this stuff is real?
It's much
Even
more
if it only
about
gives
the
a small
shock
advantage.
value.
Exactly.
Right.
The U.S. could be
Intimidation, and
completely
crucially, that
blindsided
in-group
in a
bonding.
conflict that
Using
doesn't
extreme
use
stuff
bombs
to
or
feel
spies
connected.
in the
Can
traditional
you maybe
sense.
clarify
So
that a
this
bit? Because we
perceived
hear these
threat,
terms
this
like
potential
neo-Nazism,
psychic gap,
accelerationism,
it leads
they're heavy
directly to the
concepts.
CIA
What
starting
are they
Project
actually trying to
Stargate?
accelerate
Which was kind of the umbrella
That's a really
program.
critical
And under
question.
Stargate,
So
you get these
acceleration is,
sub-projects.
in
Project
this kind of
Sunstreak was one of them.
It's this
run by the
extreme
Defense
belief that
Intelligence
society is
Agency, the
basically
DIA,
broken, corrupt.
mostly through the 1980s.
And the only way to get
Okay,
to some kind of
so
quote,
Sunstreak
superior
gets going,
future is to
and
speed up
on
its collapse
paper,
through
its
chaos,
job
violence,
sounds,
mass disruption.
well, almost
the
straightforward for that
neo-Nazi
world.
and satanic aesthetics.
Recruit people,
They
train
aren't
them as
necessarily a
remote
unified
viewers,
political plan, but
get them
they're
to project
incredibly
their
effective
consciousness,
signals.
basically.
Right.
They instantly
and
tell
spy
you
on Soviet
total
facilities,
rejection of mainstream
gather
morals.
intel.
It makes
Standard
members feel
espionage, just
with
with
a
a very
very
unconventional
extreme,
method.
connected,
But
and
that's
wanting
not
to
how
do
it played
awful
out, was it?
things.
It became
that
clear pretty
aesthetic, that
fast this wasn't just
rejection,
about finding
it
missile
clearly
silos.
No,
proved
almost right
sticky.
away, the
And the
viewers
structure
weren't
you
just
mentioned,
describing,
that's the reason it's
submarine
become
pens
such a
or
nightmare
radar
for agencies
installations.
globally,
The data
right?
started
Because
getting
when the founder,
Weird
Cadenhead, got
how.
arrested,
well, that was the big
the
turning
network didn't
point,
just
really.
die.
The viewers
Exactly.
started
You have to think
reporting
of
things that,
764
based on our normal understanding of
less like a
physics and
company
reality
with a
just
CEO
shouldn't exist.
and
more
Things
like
that
a
shouldn't exist.
terrifying,
Okay, now we're
unlicensed
getting
franchise.
somewhere.
It's
Yeah.
designed to be
The information
decentralized.
they
You
were
arrest
bringing
one
back
leader,
was
fine,
pushing
other cells
way
just pick up
past
the
the
mantle.
boundaries of what
We've seen
anyone
this rapid
expected.
emergence of
It
splinter groups
fundamentally
using the
challenged what the program was
764
even
name
supposed
like
to be
this
doing.
recognized
So
awful
tell me
brand.
about these viewers. They weren't
764
just random
Inferno,
people off the
CVLT,
street, right?
Casker, Harm
Many had
Nation,
military
No
backgrounds.
Lives
That's
Matter.
right. Often
Just a few
military
that popped
personnel,
up.
often
with
and
members
they went
kind
through
of
this
overlapping
really
between them.
specific
And this
structured
resilience,
training,
this is what makes it such a persistent threat.
controlled protocols.
So if we look
was
at
the
how
term,
they
like
actually
coordinate
operate,
remote viewing or
their targeting is
CRV.
quite
CRV.
precise.
Okay, so it
The
wasn't
victims
just
are minors,
like
often
closing your
aged
eyes and
8 to
hoping for
17.
the best.
No,
And they
no, very
specifically look for
systematic.
kids
They
who
might
are
be
maybe
given just a set of
highly
geographic
isolated,
coordinates,
struggling
or
with
maybe a
mental
random
health,
number
or
linked
just looking for
to
some
a
kind
target.
of acceptance.
Then they
you know,
go through these
belonging online.
stages, sort of
They actively
drilling
seek
down,
out the
describing
psychologically
sensory
vulnerable.
details,
And they find them
sketching
in places where
impressions,
kids hang out digitally.
trying to build
Sources
a
point to
picture
big
of a target
platforms,
they
maybe
knew
ones
nothing
used
about
every day,
consciously.
Discord,
Often
Telegram,
something hidden
Roblox,
miles away, maybe even
various
sealed in
social
an
media
envelope
sites,
right there in the
gaming
room.
forums
And
too.
did it work?
They're hiding right there in plain sight.
Well, the early
The
result
grooming
process
were
itself, it's
apparently
slow, it's strategic.
intriguing.
Members will
Impressive,
befriend
maybe,
victims,
but
sometimes
small
over
scale.
weeks, months
You
even.
know, sketches
It
that
poses
looked
someone
surprisingly
caring,
like a
maybe a
Soviet
potential
factory.
boyfriend or girlfriend, or
Details
just someone
about
who
a
listens
hidden
without
bunker
judgment.
that later matched
They essentially
spy photos.
give the attention, the
Enough to keep
validation
the funding
victim
flowing,
might be missing
definitely.
Okay,
offline.
so it had some legs.
Then,
Yeah.
once
but
that
then,
trust
like you
is
said,
built,
things took a turn.
the
sharp
boundaries,
turn, yeah, because
emotional
it's
and
one
digital,
thing to
start
sketch
get
a building
pushed.
you shouldn't
Requests
know
for
about.
private
It's something
photos,
else entirely
intimate
when you're
content,
trained
military
and then
viewers
the requests
start
get
reporting
much, much more
experiences
severe.
that just
Yeah, this is where it strikes
flat
you
out
that the
defy the
coercion seems
material
to
world as
move
we
beyond
know
typical
What-
digital
what kind of
blackmail
things?
into something
Well,
really
get this.
physically
Some
and
viewers started
psychologically
reporting
destructive.
energy
The
beings.
escalation
What energy
involves
beings?
these
Yeah.
intense
Not
demands for
people,
self-harm.
not animals.
This is
just
really the
conscious
signature
energy
brutality of
forms
the
that were
group.
apparently
Victims get
watching them while they
coerced
were
into
doing their
creating
remote
what they
Watching
call
the viewers,
chillingly
okay,
cut
that's
signs
creepy.
or blood signs.
Others claimed
Okay.
they
This
weren't
means
just moving
literally
across space,
carving
but across
specific
time.
symbols or
getting
group names,
glimpses
letters
of
like
ancient
764
history or
into
even
their own
future
skin.
events.
Whoa.
And then they have to
Time
photograph
travel.
or video this
That's what they
this
reported.
self-mutilation.
There's
as
one
proof.
really famous
That's truly horrific.
or
Why?
infamous
Why
account.
that
A
specific
viewer
act? Why is
insisted they saw the
self-mutilation
Egyptian
such
pyramids
a
being
central
built.
tactic for
But
them?
not
Well,
by
it's
Egyptians,
incredibly effective
by,
psychological
quote,
warfare.
tall,
The demand for
luminous
self-harm does two
entities.
things, really.
Luminous
First,
entities
it just
building the
shatters the
pyramids.
victim's
I mean, that
resistance.
sounds
It
like
forces
something
them
from
into an
fringe
irreversible act that
documentary.
ties
Exactly,
them
except these were
permanently to the
reports
group.
coming from within
And second,
a
that
classified
compromising
military
content, which is often
intelligence
intensely
program. That's what
graphic,
makes you
it
serve
serves
as
as
ironclad
Yeah,
leverage.
definitely. Any other
Perpetrator
examples?
threatens
yeah.
immediate
Another one,
widespread
just as
exposure
strange.
to family,
A viewer
school,
claimed they
everyone
found
if the
hidden
victim resists any
spacecraft
future
under the
demands.
ice in
So the
Antarctica.
compromising material isn't
Hidden
just, say,
spacecraft.
Oh.
nude
Like
photos.
UFOs.
It's
It
actual
seems to be the
evidence of their
implication.
own trauma
and
and
guarded
self-harm,
apparently by some
which
kind
you
of
could argue is even more
consciousness that
damaging.
resisted
And the demands
intrusion,
that come after,
like a psychic guard
they're
dog,
not always
but
about money.
not a
are
dog.
they?
Exactly
Okay, wow.
right. The
So
ransom,
these
quote unquote,
reports, were
isn't
they just
purely
ignored,
financial. It's
filed
often
away as crazy?
symbolic,
Well, officially, a lot of the
sadistic.
stuff was
The
probably
real
downplayed
reward
or
for the
buried
person doing
classified
this is power, but
prestige,
inside the project,
status within the
the whispers
764
started.
hierarchy.
The
It's
idea
about
to
showing
hold
they
that
can
maybe
force
remote
someone
viewing
into
wasn't just
utter
about spying on the
submission, utter
Soviets
depravity.
anymore. Maybe,
Okay.
and that's why the
Maybe it
abuse
was
just
about
keeps
making
escalating.
contact.
And this is where it
often
gets
way
even
beyond
stranger,
what you
right?
see in
The
traditional
connection
blackmail
or the
cases.
apparent
sheer
connection to
depravity, I guess,
occult
and the scale of
practices.
these tactics.
Yes, that's
Mm.
meant
another
that law
layer to this
enforcement
whole
couldn't
thing,
just
which is
handle it with
fascinating.
standard charges, did
People
they? They had to
within the
escalate
program
the response.
apparently
We've seen
started noticing
specific
these
cases like the
disturbing
initial arrests of
parallels
the founder,
between the
Caden
remote
Head,
viewing
and
techniques
then
they
these
were
high-profile
developing and
charges
refining,
against leaders like
and practices
Leonidas
found in
War,
really old
Varagiannis,
occult
and Prazan
traditions.
Tripinopol
Occult
from
traditions,
that
like,
764 Inferno subgroup.
Methods
And
described
this
in esoteric
escalation, it's
orders.
gone international
Groups
now.
like
You
the
can point to
Hermetic
that
Order of the
extremely
Golden
high-profile
Dawn
case,
or
the
the 17-year-old in
Rosicrucians.
Connecticut.
Okay.
They were looking
Manipulated
at
by a
rituals for
764
astral
member
projection,
achieving
not just
trance
sharing
states,
images and
intense
self-harm,
visualization
but also
exercises,
making
the whole
credible
idea
bomb
of
threats
separating
against
your
local
consciousness
places.
from your
When the
physical
abuse starts
body.
spilling over
Wait, so the
into
technique
threats against public
Sunstreak was
safety
teaching
like
its
that, the whole
military viewers.
classification has to
seem
shift.
to
And that's where the
directly
US government's
mirror
stance
these
gets really
ancient
significant.
mystical
Why
practices.
call it a
It's
terror
quite striking
network?
when you put them
What
side by side.
So the
Specific
question
action
becomes,
pushes it past being
was the
just
Pentagon,
very
was the DIA
sophisticated criminal ring
inadvertently
into
stumbling
the
onto,
realm of terrorism?
or maybe
Well, the distinction,
rediscovering
according to the
some kind
Department
of
of Justice
ancient
filing,
technique,
seems to lie
something
in the
mystics
motivation
and secret
the scale.
societies had been
Standard
using for
criminal
centuries.
groups,
That's
they
the
want money.
implication, yeah.
Or
Was
legal
this
stuff.
military
Yeah.
intelligence
Now,
program
764 does
actually
that too,
unwitting,
but
or
their
maybe
methods are
witting,
explicitly
occult
charged with ideology,
pretty
the
mind-bending
nihilism,
thought.
the
And it didn't
accelerationism we
stop
talked
there, did
about,
it?
promoting
experiences got
societal
darker.
breakdown
They
through this
did.
psychological
Some viewers
warfare
started
and
reporting
coercion.
encounters
The
with
terror
actively
classification
hostile
reflects a belief that
presences.
the
Well,
organization's
How?
scale,
They
its
describe,
methods,
you know,
they're
entering a
intended to
location mentally,
destabilize
projecting
moral
their
norms,
consciousness there
incite
only
violence
to be
for
confronted,
ideological reasons,
not by
not
human
just personal
guards,
gain.
but by
That
what they
designation
described as
carries serious
shadowy
weight.
entities.
How big
things
is
that
the actual
seemed
footprint then?
fully
Are we
aware of
talking
their
small
psychic
cells or something
intrusion and
bigger?
actively tried
The
to
footprint
block
is
them
massive,
or push
and
them
it seems
out.
to be
Aware of
growing.
them.
The
Yeah.
FBI
Like
has
psychic
hundreds
guards.
of
Essentially,
active
yes,
investigations.
which
Reports
raises a
suggest over
really
250
profound
cases right
and
now.
frankly
And
unsettling
internally, they
possibility.
confirm that
Which
every
is?
single FBI
Well, if the
field
human
officer
mind can
across
actually
the
travel
US is
outside the
handling at
body,
least one
maybe.
700 maybe those
164
non-physical
related
realms
cases.
aren't
Every
empty.
single
Maybe
one.
other
Yeah,
intelligences
and
already live there.
internationally,
And maybe they don't appreciate
agencies like the
visitors.
RCMP in
Exactly.
Canada,
Entities
they're
that
actively working
really
to
didn't
disrupt
want
the
people like
subgroups that
Sunstreak
operate
viewers
across
poking
borders.
around. It makes you
This
wonder,
is genuinely
was
like a
Sunstreak
hidden
opening
digital
doors
war
that had
being
been
fought
deliberately
everywhere
shut
to really
for a
get
very
the
long
internal
time,
sort
for a
of
good reason?
gravity
they
of
were opening
764.
doors.
You have to look deeper into these
What
perverse
exactly did they
internal
find on
dynamics.
the other side?
It functions almost like a cult.
Because some of the most
Status
sensational
within the group.
claims
It's
are
measured almost
about,
entirely by how extreme a
aliens.
member's actions are.
Extraterrestrial.
Their willingness to
Absolutely.
commit
This is
violence,
where the
severe
story really
self-harm
goes into high
themselves
gear.
sometimes, or
We actually
intense
have
cruelty towards
declassified
victims.
documents,
So these
fragments,
grotesque
hints really that
tasks become
suggest
like a twisted
some
rite of
remote viewing
passage,
sessions were
a kind of
specifically targeting
meritocracy of
Mars.
misery.
Mars.
Precisely. Yeah.
Like the planet
and this
Mars.
culture of
The planet
cruelty,
Mars.
It's maintained
There's
because
one
they're
particularly
constantly
famous
exposed to
session,
extreme
often
content.
cited, where a
The
viewer gave
network
this
frequently
incredibly
shares
detailed
gore,
description.
explicit
They claimed
documentation
they
of
were
self-harm,
observing
even
Mars
animal abuse.
millions of years
This
ago.
whole process leads to
Millions.
profound
And they
described seeing these
desensitization in the
tall
members.
beings
They start to
sheltering
normalize
inside
horrific
massive
acts just by
pyramidal
consuming them
structures.
Pyramids on
constantly,
Mars.
which
Pyramids
makes
on
the
Mars
leap
as
from
their
just
planet
watching
was
to actually
dying around them.
participating
A
much
civilization
shorter.
facing extinction.
That complexity, it
okay.
adds a really disturbing
quite a
layer
climb.
to the whole
It is,
investigation,
and it wasn't
doesn't
just Mars.
This
Other
environment
sessions
has,
allegedly
maybe
targeted
naturally,
well-known UFO
led to some
hotspots and
darker,
crash sites on
unverified
Earth,
theories
including
about the
Roswell.
group's true
Roswell had to
scope.
be in there.
Absolutely, yeah. And
One theory
viewers
that keeps
reportedly
popping up
described
alleges
seeing
ties to the
non-human
order of
bodies,
9
alien
angles,
artifacts,
09A.
all hidden
Okay, what's
away
that?
deep
It's an
inside
esoteric
classified
extremist
government
group known
facilities.
for its
So not just seeing things
satanic,
far away,
fascist, and
but
explicitly
seeing things the
accelerationist
government was
ideology.
actively hiding.
So the belief
That's
among
the
some
claim.
analysts
It
that
suggests the
764 might
viewers
be
weren't
aiming
just
for much
passive
more than just
observers.
personal
They were
abuse. They might be
potentially
trying to erode
uncovering evidence of an
fundamental
alien
norms or maybe
presence that was
provoke
being
actual
actively
mass
concealed.
casualty
And then
violence.
there's
Again,
Wright
pushing
Patterson
that
Air
core
Force Base,
accelerationist
right?
goal.
Always comes
And
up
we
in
also
these
hear
stories.
these allegations
Wright
flying
Patterson.
around about like
Another
hidden
chilling
institutional
account
support,
involved a
maybe
viewer who
deliberate
claimed
data
they
suppression, or
psychically
even
entered a
media
hidden
blackouts
chamber
that
deep
supposedly
underground
keep
there.
the
What do they
network's
see?
true
Containers
global scale
holding
hidden from the public.
biological
Yeah, and look, we have to
specimens that
anchor
were
this
completely
discussion in
unlike
verified
anything
evidence
known
here.
on Earth.
While the
Alien
sources
bodies,
absolutely
basically.
confirm the
That's
heavy
the
use of
strong
symbolic
implication.
language,
And
and
another
another viewer,
documented
possibly
alignment with
targeting
acceleration
Satanist and
location or a
neo-Nazi
similar
rhetoric,
one,
Right.
claimed
whether
they
there are
witnessed some
formal
kind of
occult
psychic
practices
network.
or
Something
formalized
connecting
ritualistic
human
things
minds
happening
to,
that's much less clearly
something
documented.
else, something
Plus,
beyond
remember
our
that
world, out among the
decentralized
stars.
structure.
A psychic
While it
network
makes
connecting us to
them
aliens.
Resilient.
That was the report.
Mhm.
It
So you look
simultaneously
at all
makes
these
the
accounts
idea
together,
of a
Mars,
single
Roswell,
central
Wright
leadership
Patterson's
pulling every
psychic
strategic
network.
string
It paints a
highly
very different
questionable.
picture than just
The
spying
reality
on
is
the
probably
Soviets.
more fractured, more
Completely different. If you
opportunistic,
take these reports
driven
at
by
face
localized
value, even
peer
just
pressure
partially,
and individual
the
actions
implication is
within that
huge.
framework.
Project
Let's bring this back
Sunstreak
to relevance.
might have
What does
started
this mean
as
for
espionage,
you,
but
the
it seems
listener,
to have
and just the
pivoted.
digital
It
world we
became
all
about
share?
preparing
Group
for contact
764,
with non-human
it's a
intelligence.
terrifying example
Or maybe more
of how
cynically,
predators
about
exploit
making
the
sure that
isolation,
contact
the low
remained a
self-esteem, the
kept
depression
far away from the
that
public
are,
eye.
frankly,
But the theories
alarmingly
don't even
common
stop
among
at
young
just
people
ETs
growing
from
up
other
online
planets,
today.
do they?
Yeah.
Some people
This
take it even
network
further.
has basically
right.
eroded
There's a
what
whole
we
other
once
branch
thought
of
were
theory
safe
suggesting
digital
Sunstreak
spaces.
wasn't just
You know,
encountering
gaming
extraterrestrials,
communities,
but
interest
potentially
forums, social apps,
interdimensional
and
beings.
weaponized them for
Interdimensional, like
exploitation.
decades.
And this
Right.
just spotlights
US
the
government
critical
line was
problem of
basically
platform failures. Platforms get
supernatural
constantly
stuff, psychic
criticized for
powers,
being
telepathy,
reactive, right? They'll
seeing
take down
things far
content
away
after
with
it's
your
flagged,
mind.
often after
Pure
the damage is
fantasy.
done.
That's what they
But
told
they're
everyone.
consistently
the
less
public
effective
face.
at
Complete
proactively
skepticism.
detecting or preventing
You know,
those
while that was
initial
the official
stages of
story,
grooming or
behind
coercion
closed
that happen
doors,
in
something
private chats, especially
something
end-to-end
much
encrypted
stranger
ones.
was
And it
apparently
becomes
going
this
on.
digital game of whack-a-mole.
Deep
You ban
inside
a
the
server, you ban a
intelligence
specific
community.
account.
It's a really
Doesn't
interesting
stop the
contrast,
problem,
isn't
it just
it?
leads to
Publicly, it's all
fragmentation.
scientific
The groups quickly
dismissal.
pop up somewhere else
Privately,
under a new
the
name,
Pentagon, the
and
CIA,
law enforcement has to start the
they're
tracking
clearly
process
wrestling
all
with something
over
very
again.
different.
Compounding
These
all of this
fantasies
is
suddenly
the
become
immense legal complexity.
a
Because
serious
these crimes are
strategic
truly
issue.
transnational.
Exactly.
You've got
And that
victims,
worry, that
perpetrators,
sort of
servers,
creeping fear
all in
about
different
psychic
countries, different
warfare, it
jurisdictions.
leads to one of the
So legal
honestly
action,
most
gathering
bizarre and
evidence,
top
just
secret
coordinating
projects of the
judicial
whole Cold
responses
War.
becomes
Project
unbelievably
Sunstreak.
complex.
I mean, just
There
picture
are
it.
significant
An actual
legal
government
gaps when you're
project
trying
trying
to
to
prosecute
weaponize
an
the human
organization
mind.
whose
Funded off
members
the books.
literally
Totally
span
secret.
multiple
And officially, the
continents.
cover story,
So
or
the
maybe the
ultimate
initial
danger,
idea
as
was
security experts
remote
seem to
viewing.
summarize it, is
Right.
this toxic
This
mix.
the
Supposed
combination of
ability
sexual
for
abuse,
trained people to
coercion,
just
and
perceive
these radical
distant
ideological
places,
elements,
secret
even if they
enemy
start
bases,
out as
maybe
just
even
aesthetic,
peek into the future,
creates this lethal
all just using their
psychological
minds.
pipeline.
Yeah.
And we
It
should be
risks
clear, this
escalating
wasn't some
vulnerable
like
young people
side
who are
hobby.
already
It wasn't
primed
just
by
a few folks
desperation
messing around.
Okay. towards
This was a
much more
strategic
explicit,
move, a direct
organized
response
extremist
to what
violence.
they
It's like a
thought the Soviets were
radicalization
doing.
mechanism
They were
disguised
urgently
as
trying
just
to
a
get
peer
an edge
group.
in a
Hashtag
completely
tag
new
outro.
kind of
Group 764
battlefield.
really
And that's what we're
stands
doing
as a
today. We're
stark
gonna
warning.
peel back
It
those
shows us
layers of
exactly how
secrecy,
digital predators
really,
adapt, how
deep
isolated
dive
people can be
into
systematically
Project
weaponized,
Sunstreak
and how these
and the
networks
kind
of
of
cruelty can
wild
thrive in the very
conspiracy
faces we
theories that are
assume
still
are just
swirling
for
around.
gaming
Yeah,
or
because the
socializing.
story goes
Yeah,
way
the focus
beyond
for
just
society now. It
psychic
has to be
spying.
Oh,
multi-layered.
absolutely.
We have to
It
pivot
might have
from
cracked
just,
open the door to,
you know,
well,
tracking
alien
arrests
contact, maybe
to
even
demanding
some sources
full
suggest
accountability from the
interdimensional
tech platforms
conflict.
It
themselves.
gets pretty out there.
Insisting
It
they
really does.
develop
So we're gonna
proactive
look at where it
detection
came from,
methods,
the
not
really
just
unsettling
reactive
things
takedowns
that
after
viewers
the fact.
reported seeing.
And we also need
the,
much stronger
weird
global
overlaps
legal
with old occult
cooperation
stuff,
to close those
and these
jurisdictional
incredible
gaps we
claims
talked
about contacting.
Knowing about groups like
the
764
unknown.
really puts the onus
So yeah,
on all of us,
settling.
doesn't it?
This is
Yeah.
where
To
things get
recognize
weird.
the signs
So where did
of this
Sunstreak even come
sophisticated
from?
online grooming.
It really
which
kicks
often
off
looks
back in the
like
early 70s.
genuine
There was this
friendship
sort of
or even
quiet
romance
panic
until
brewing
it's far too late.
in
Absolutely.
the intelligence
And
world
the
during
true
the Cold
measure
War.
of how
Right.
society
Word got
responds
out
that the
it won't
Soviets
just be
were
calculated
pouring
in the number of
serious
arrests
money and
made
effort
against
into
764
members.
And not just dabbling.
It'll be
We're
measured
talking
in our ability to
state-sponsored
empower young
experiments,
people and
telepathy,
parents with
moving
the
objects
digital
with the mind,
literacy needed to spot
psychokinesis,
this kind of
and
extreme
crucially,
grooming.
remote
And
viewing.
crucially,
Yeah,
in our
and when
commitment
US
to providing
intelligence
robust
picked up on
support
this,
services that genuinely
alarms went
believe and
off
protect survivors
big
when they do
time
come
in the
forward.
Pentagon,
That
especially.
commitment
You can imagine the
ultimately
fear,
is
right?
our
What if
best
this stuff
defense
is real?
against this
Even if it only
escalating
gives a
digital
small
threat.
advantage.